Do your eardrums need to be assaulted with continuous, disgustingly loud synths and sound effects for you to be able to actually enjoy the music? Do you want to be continuously confused by genre conventions because the genre name completely morphed into meaning something different thanks to just one person? Do you have one of the most horrendous trims ever conceived on this planet? Well, dubstep might be the perfect genre for you, and also prepare yourself, this is going to be a bit of a weird one. So dubstep is a little bit confusing to cover. Realistically, the genre describes electronic music that would branch off from UK garage in the early 2000s. It commonly utilizes syncopated rhythms, a deep sub bass, a dark tone, and is oftentimes actually pretty chilled out music. Thing is, what many of you probably immediately think when hearing the term dubstep is this dude as well as whoop whoop whoop, and probably, if you're like me, being 12 years old. The offshoot dubstep subgenre spearheaded by Skrillex that would blow up in the early 2010s is technically called brostep, but is commonly labeled as dubstep despite the fact that it sounds vastly different to what was known as dubstep before. This makes it a little bit confusing to definitively highlight genre conventions, so brostep oftentimes just intensifies some of the characteristics of dubstep to an absurd degree, so I'll just highlight that when discussing. Essentially, dubstep stemmed from garage artists beginning to experiment with the music, often leading to a minimalistic sound that focuses so heavily on the low end that you won't be able to hear half the song unless you have a 3 feet long subwoofer. Dubstep is often dissonant, utilizing unique drum patterns and occasional vocal samples that are often samples from some of the weirdest or obscure places. For example, YouTube a cappella covers with like 2 views. Dubstep often sits within the 132 to 142 BPM range, focusing on dark nocturnal atmospheres that sound exactly like walking through London at night whilst on Benadryl. Although the atmosphere within the songs have consistently changed as time has progressed, the more popular brostep is oftentimes bright and chaotic, focusing on consistent build-ups and drops. This is when we get to the classic, easily recognized wobble bass, also known as the wub or sick wubs if you're stuck in 2012. A wobble bass is essentially an extended bass note that's manipulated to sound like a broken piece of machinery operated by a hipster with black frame glasses. This style of bass is more synonymous with the party side of dubstep, essentially brostep, with this section of the genre essentially being known for the more outlandish, ridiculous sounding wobble basses. Early dubstep would take many elements from drum and bass and UK garage, with bass drops being prevalent. When you hear the term bass drop, you probably think back to being audibly assaulted by 6 bright wobble basses at the same time, whilst watching some mediocre Call of Duty edit. But within early dubstep, it was a lot more subdued than that. The percussion would oftentimes pause and come back in, accompanied by a deeper sub bass and more intensity. Dubstep would also be more akin to drum and bass in UK garage through its live performances. DJs were often accompanied by MCs that would rap the most atrocious shit over the music.
Slap that batty like table tennis. Oh, give her the Big Mac covered in the relish.
They also utilize rewinds. This is essentially musical edging. The crowd gets so hype that the DJ immediately has to rewind and play a section again. This was originally done with actual records, meaning this sound is heard. This can intensify the energy for many listeners, although for me, just actively pisses me off. So how on earth did this happen? How can an edgy, underground, niche electronic genre turn into this in just over 10 years? So during the late 90s, the UK underground electronic music scene was developing new genres at a rapid pace, leading to a lot of overlap between conventions. This was particularly true for dubstep and grime, making it difficult to pinpoint the origins of both and when they kind of split apart. Croydon within London is specifically touted as the birthplace of dubstep, thanks to a record shop named Big Apple. Around the time, Croydon wasn't seen as a particularly artistic place, with not much going on. This perception would be changed by the artists creating and releasing music out of the studio above the Big Apple record shop. Artists such as Scream and DJ Hatcher, the latter actually working at the front desk in the store, would originally produce within the hardcore, rave and techno genres. They would begin simplifying and diversifying their sound, inspired by pirate stations such as Rinse FM that were beginning to play the more minimalist side of garage. DJ Hatcher would take dark garage into new directions, adding reggae-like dub plates, developing the dark, clipped and minimal dubstep. The influence of DJ Hatcher alongside easier access to software in order to create the actual music led to more artists becoming inspired to create music within the sound. The artists within the early scene would begin playing at Soho's Velvet Rooms, 2 sparsely attended events designed to play music outside of the typical MC-hosted garage raves. Scream was amongst these individuals and would originally make music on his PlayStation stations somehow, before moving on to Fruity Loops. He would be heavily inspired by the music he heard from the artists within the store, originally copying their blueprint, although as he would improve and find his voice within production, he would develop the emerging genre of dubstep into new directions. This would be highlighted within his collaborative release with Benga, the Judgment EP, which utilizes a typical garage swing, although almost skips the melody entirely for a dark rumbling bass line that would become typical for future dubstep, well until this motherfucker. The genre would continue to spread through pirate radio stations throughout the UK, with artists such as Orice J, Plastician, LD and Code 9 created music within the genre. Many of the artists from Big Apple had moved to the DMZ record label at the time, and with nowhere to play they decided to open a nightclub named DMZ. This would become the spiritual home of dubstep. Richard James, also known as Aphex motherfucking Twin, would release a few compilations including dubstep tracks featuring pioneers within the genre such as Code 9, Plastic Man and Digital Mystics. This spread the sound and genre to more people, with newspapers actually beginning to write articles on the developing sound. 2005 would see more prominence for the scene after Radio 1 DJ Marianne Hobbs would feature top dubstep producers within the Dubstep Wars show, creating a new global audience for the genre that before this point was kind of just stuck within the confines of the UK underground. This would culminate with Burial's 2006 self-titled debut that would truly become recognised within the mainstream, winning Best Album awards. Dubstep was also beginning to be utilised within the film industry, specifically with Children of Men. This resulted in the sound spreading to America, specifically through the works of Joe Nice, leading to regular dubstep nights being held within the major cities in America. This popularity would also spread to places such as Barcelona and Japan. 2007 would become an important year for the development of dubstep, with Benga and Koki's collaborative track Night becoming widely played by various DJs across the globe. This would be followed by Burial's magnum opus, and potentially the greatest album within UK electronic, Untrue, which is commonly labelled as dubstep, although Burial would actually state himself that the album focuses more so on the precursors to dubstep, such as two-step or house. So obviously by this point dubstep had become a mainstay in electronic music, which had obviously led to a few mainstream uses of elements of the genre, specifically through hits such as Night and dubstep artists beginning to remix popular songs. This would culminate in popular dubstep producers chasing status, beginning to collaborate with extremely famous artists such as Snoop Dogg, and as the years progressed, dubstep would continue to have relative success on the charts, although nothing would compare to what the f would happen in the 2010s with brostep. Due to dubstep's mainstay reputation within the electronic scene, many post-dubstep subgenres had developed, one of which being the aptly named brostep, which would remove the emphasis on sub-bass, instead launching the mid-frequencies towards your eardrums at a ridiculous speed. Skrillex would launch this genre into the mainstream, where it appealed to primarily 12-year-old boys and jocks with zero brain cells. The combination of well-produced electronic music alongside the ridiculously energetic nature of the subgenre appealed to a lot of different people within the culture at the time. Dubstep had suddenly gone from a dark ambient genre with a focus on the sub-bass to something that sounds like an angry robot continuously throwing metal at the wall, which began to damage the original genre somewhat. Dubstep has always been a UK genre. It started in the UK and became popular within the UK, and all it took was one American with a haircut to completely change what the genre meant for the majority of the general public. Of course, when Americans get their grubby little sausage fingers on dubstep, they had to make it as loud, bright and irritating as possible, which seems inevitable, not gonna lie. They seem to do it to absolutely everything. Although Skrillex had launched the genre into the stratosphere, it wasn't bound to last, as anything mainstream that sounds as distinct and loud as brostep is only ever a flash in the pan. Much like it always does, mainstream music will return to its simple, poppy, boring self in order to sell as many records to idiots as possible. This led to the driving force behind dubstep within America, Skrillex beginning to create trap and EDM music to appease his label overlords. Other genres have emerged from post-dubstep, and most notably rhythm and color bass, the former being essentially a continuation of the more grimy songs within dubstep, and the latter being more so a continuation of brostep, which focuses more on melody than just robotic screaming sounds. Dubstep is a bit of a weird one to cover, and I feel like I might have butchered it a bit, as what is commonly seen as dubstep by the majority of people doesn't really align to its history or what it actually is, and at the very least doesn't tell the full story. necessary. For artists like Skrillex to even exist, you need the figures within the underground to work and experiment on music that oftentimes is way less commercially viable. It's why proper classification is important, not just so elitists can complain if somebody misgenders a song within a particular genre, but so artists within scenes can be recognized for their creation of boundary pushing music without genre labels just immediately being thrown on and fully credited to the most popular artists, who may somewhat take elements from the original sound but will probably fit into a different genre. At least both iterations of dubstep share the same trait, the fact that literally no one gives a fuck anymore.